This is the Italian Citizenship Podcast, hosted by Marco Permunian and Rafael Di Furia.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, presented by ItaliancitizenshipAssistance.com. Of course, we are back here with the one and only Marco Permunian, Italian attorney. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
I am doing great, thank you. And today we're here to talk a bit about applying for Italian citizenship in Italy. We have really gone deep into this subject, but today we wanted to do a somewhat general, frequently asked question episode on this topic, because there are some topics that are very common to come across in the early stages of this when people are getting started with their research. So we wanted to really devote this episode to those individuals who may be kind of earlier in the process, just looking for some of the initial starter information. So Marco, let's just jump straight into it. And the first and probably most important question: does a person need to speak Italian when they are applying for Italian citizenship by descent in Italy?
That's a good question, and I'm happy that the episode is specifically about applying for citizenship directly in Italy, because the answer varies depending on where you're applying for citizenship. But let me get this out of the way so that people do not get confused. To apply for citizenship by descent, it doesn't matter if you apply at the consulate or in Italy, speaking Italian is not a legal requirement. However, if you are applying for citizenship directly in Italy as opposed to through the consulate, which is the subject of this episode, applying for citizenship in Italy, in that specific case, if you're applying by yourself, speaking Italian might help quite a bit. Of course, if you have a lawyer or a professional by your side that will also act as your interpreter, it may not be necessary at all. But if you're going DIY, then you're going to have to communicate to the people at the town hall, which is where you file your application. And you'll find that in most cases, they do not speak English. So to recap, to apply for citizenship by descent in general, speaking Italian is not a legal requirement. And you might not need to speak in Italian at all during the process if you apply through the consulate or if you are applying with some assistance in Italy. But if you are applying by yourself in Italy, which of course might be difficult, but for those people who do so, they might have to communicate in Italian with the clerk at the comune, at the town hall, because they're not legally required to speak to you in English.
It's a topic that I always find very interesting. And of course, this is where having somebody like you guys at ItaliancitizenshipAssistance.com really are able to show the extra value that you're able to bring beyond just the guidance, but also the ability to help facilitate these things. But to just move on to the next question, though, what are some of the advantages of applying for Italian citizenship directly in Italy?
Well, the first advantage, and probably the most important, is that you are able to skip the line at the consulate. And some consulates, they have a long wait time for an appointment, which could be several months. And if we're talking about the US, booking an appointment at your local Italian consulate is always necessary. So you find yourself in a situation where you do have to book an appointment, and that needs to be booked in advance before even you start gathering documents, because the wait time, depending on the consulate, might be longer. So the advantage of filing the application in Italy is that there is basically no wait time, or almost no wait time now, especially after the health emergency. Some municipalities are starting to require that you book the service, that you book the appointment to apply, to visit the comune to apply for citizenship by descent. And the comune, by the way, is the town hall. So when I say comune, I refer to the town hall. But in many municipalities, especially the small ones, and we have about 8,000 municipalities in Italy, it is not necessary to book an appointment. So it's just a matter of sending an email, and in some cases, just showing up in person to with your paperwork, with your citizenship documents, and saying, "Hey, I'm here to start the dual citizenship process." So the fact that the process is that there's no wait time to be able to apply is probably the first advantage, and then the second could probably be that the processing time, so after the application is filed, is generally quicker than the processing time at the consulate. The consulate will take a number of months, in most cases several months, to process your citizenship application, over a year. It depends on the consulate, on the time period, on the workload, but it's normally considerably longer than the processing time at a municipality in Italy. And depending on the municipality, the processing time could be as short as 2-3 months to, it could be as long as, in some rare cases, maybe 10 to 12 months. But I'd say the average is below 6 months, which is a shorter average processing time than the processing time of the consulate. And of course, one of the biggest advantages of applying in Italy is that you get to enjoy Italy during your application process, because you have to be able to reside in Italy and spend time there while your application is being processed.
It's a beautiful, wonderful country that has so much to offer. The culinary experience, the people, the countryside, the cities, everything. There's so much there to see, do, experience, and be a part of, that it's wonderful to have an excuse to have to go to Italy, not just I'm going to go travel to Italy. No, you have to go. You're making that obligation for yourself by choosing to go through this process. But even then, I think it might be worth getting into what some of the eligibility requirements would be for this process. Like, what does a person need to prove that they have this right to Italian citizenship by descent?
Of course, the eligibility requirements are the same, regardless of whether you apply for citizenship through the consulate or via an Italian municipality. And in essence, what you have to prove is that you have an Italian-born ancestor who was born in Italy after Italy became a nation, so after 1861, or if your ancestor was born before, that he or she was still alive in 1861, even if he or she had already emigrated to another country, which is more of a rare situation, because the average American of Italian descent, they normally have an ancestor who was born right after the unification of Italy, even if there are, of course, exceptions. And like I said, even if your ancestor was born before, that doesn't necessarily disqualify you. The second requirement is that your ancestor didn't become naturalized, meaning a U.S. citizen, before their child was born in the U.S. And the reason of that is that with the naturalization in the U.S., the Italian-born ancestor was basically relinquishing their Italian citizenship. So it's important that such renunciation didn't happen before the child was born, because otherwise there wouldn't have been this transfer of citizenship from the Italian parent to the child born in the U.S. It's also important that the naturalization didn't happen before 1912, because if your ancestor became naturalized before June 12, 1912, no matter when the child was born, that would disqualify you from applying for citizenship by descent. And the last requirement that is important to mention is that if you have a female ancestor, no matter if it's the ancestor born in Italy or somebody else in the Italian line who is a female, the child of that female must have been born after January 1st, 1948, in order for you to qualify to apply for Italian citizenship through an Italian municipality or via an Italian consulate. And if the child in question was born prior to January 1st, 1948, then it means you have a 1948 case. And we talked about 1948 cases extensively in other videos. And I think we released just a while ago an FAQ episode about 1948 cases. And I encourage people to watch the many episodes that we released about 1948 cases to understand what that is. But in short, when there's a female ancestor who gave birth to her child before 1948, before January 1st, then you have to petition the court to obtain citizenship, and which is a very, very popular process among people that do not otherwise qualify for citizenship through a different ancestor. So those people who only have this female ancestor that they can go through to apply for citizenship, if their child was born before January 1st, 1948, these people can successfully petition the court to gain citizenship.
Very interesting. And to move on to the next section, I have here two questions that I'm going to combine, because even though in some ways they're separate, they're very much attached. Well, the first one would be, can I move to Italy and apply with my family? And the other one would be, can I bring my spouse with me? I think there could be, the reason why I say it's two questions in one is because I think there is a bit of a separation in there about how that actually may end up working. So what would that look like?
That's a very frequently asked question, especially if you think that to apply in Italy, you need to relocate to Italy for a certain period of time. So a lot of clients, they're like, okay, can I come with my children? Should my children come? Can I apply on behalf of my children or siblings or my parents? And can my spouse come with me? Can my spouse, he or she, stay with me during the process? If not, how long can she stay? So these are all legitimate questions that the same person wouldn't ask themselves if they were applying for citizenship by descent through the consulate, because when you apply through the consulate, really the process just entails showing up at your appointment with all your citizenship documents, and there is no question about can my spouse stay with me somewhere? Should my kids come with me? So it's a very frequently asked question, and the answer is, I'm gonna just answer separately. I'm gonna talk about children and immediate family first, and then I'm gonna answer the question regarding the spouse. So if you have adult children, then they should be present in Italy with you, and you should file a group application if they also want to gain citizenship at the same time, because you cannot apply on behalf of people that do not move their residency in Italy, not even children or parents. So whoever in your family, parents, that goes for parents, children who are over 18, and siblings or cousins, whoever wants to apply, they need to be physically present in Italy, and they need to move their residency. So all of you should get an apartment, establish residency, get a lease agreement, which doesn't mean that everybody needs an apartment, a separate apartment or a separate residence address. Everybody can share the same residency address, and it's not even necessary for everyone to be on the lease, but you do need to be present. You do need to be present at the several appointments that are involved in the process, and the clerk needs to see you, and you need to sign forms in front of the clerk. The first time that you go to the town hall when you establish residency, the second time when you apply for citizenship, the third time when you apply for the residency permit. So it's necessary for everybody to be in Italy. And of course, like we said in other videos, there is some flexibility in terms of how long people need to stay in Italy during the process. It's advisable to stay for as much as you can to stay in town, but the law allows for flexibility. So if you have work commitments, you are able and allowed to travel back to the US, travel back and forth when necessary. So it's okay to go back home in the US for short period of times. And it's okay if the people that are in Italy do not follow the same schedule. So it's fine if you travel back to the US for a work commitment while your children stay in Italy during the application process. Now, I've talked about siblings and adult children and parents, but there's an exception for minor children, meaning that it's not strictly necessary to bring your children along in Italy during the process and for them to stay or to formally apply for citizenship at the same time as you, because if they're under 18, you can always register them through the consulate once you are back in America. Of course, if they are together with you in Italy, they will also gain citizenship. But if they're not with you, you can always, if they have school, if they have commitments, if your spouse is staying in America with them, if you're divorced, you can always register their birth certificates through the consulate after the fact, after you become an Italian citizen. And of course, that makes the process for them a little bit longer because there's an extra step for them, meaning the registration of their birth certificate through the consulate. But you need to be very careful because if they're turning 18 during the process, in the middle of the process, then they kind of get cut out from the process and they need to apply for citizenship as adults through the consulate. So get in line and formally apply for citizenship by descent. And it's no longer a matter of just registering the birth certificates of your minor children, which is a very easy and fast process, which involves basically mailing the birth certificates to the consulate. With regard to the spouse, the situation is a little bit different because the question that normally people ask me is, can my spouse stay with me during the process, which is a very legitimate question. Normally couples are interested in understanding if they can spend time together in Italy or if they need to separate. So let me take a step back and say very briefly how it works for the applicant itself. So the applicant, the person who is applying for citizenship by descent, upon submission of the citizenship application, will apply for and receive a residency permit, which is valid during the citizenship process. So that document allows the applicant for citizenship by descent to remain in Italy and to enter Italy when they go out of the country throughout the application process. Now, this residency permit for people that are awaiting citizenship is only given to the applicant for citizenship, so it's not automatically given also to the spouse. But the spouse can apply for their own residency permit based or tied to the residency permit obtained by the applicant for citizenship by descent. The only thing to consider is that the residency permit for the spouse cannot be requested normally, because there are some exceptions, and that depends on the area when you apply for where you apply for citizenship, but it can only be requested later in the process when the applicant for citizenship has received in the mail the actual residency permit card. The way it works is that the applicant for citizenship by descent receives at first a temporary permit, which is okay to be used to travel back and forth, but the actual residency permit card will only be mailed to the applicant later in the process, and only when that's received in the mail, the spouse can apply for their own residency permit for family reasons. So based on the fact that the other spouse has applied for citizenship by descent. And that's, of course, regarding the time period between when the application is filed and when citizenship is granted, because after citizenship is granted, then the situation completely changes for the spouse of the person who has become an Italian citizen. That spouse can then remain in the country, in Italy or in the European Union, much more easily, and is entitled to a residency permit for spouses of citizens of the EU, which allows them to work, register with the national healthcare system. It's a very solid residency permit, which gives a lot of protection from the very beginning to the spouse of an Italian citizen.
Interesting. And so I guess once you've already taken all of this into consideration and to figure out your eligibility and also to figure out who you might want to bring with you or who you won't bring with you, or if you're just coming by yourself, what are the documents that you'll need before actually being able to go and apply directly in Italy? What would those documents be to prove that?
The documents required for the application process are basically birth certificates, marriage records, and death certificates for all of the individuals in your Italian line. And these documents need to be certified, they need to be in long form, and they need to be apostilled. And the apostille, we have talked about that in many episodes, and I think we did an episode about the apostille alone. It's a certification issued in the US for American documents that allows for the use of these American documents in another country that signed the Hague Convention, like Italy. So you need to collect these vital record documents, get them apostilled, and then you need to get them translated. Now, other than the vital record documents from America, you also need the vital record documents pertaining to your ancestors who were born in Italy. So, for example, your great-grandfather's birth certificate and marriage record, if you're applying through your great-grandfather. And you will also need, in this example that I just mentioned, his naturalization records. So you need the naturalization records of your ancestor who was born in Italy to prove when the ancestor was naturalized. When you apply in Italy, normally, but it's best to check with the comune, you only need the vital record documents for the individuals in your Italian line. So you do not need generally the birth and death certificates for the spouses of the individuals in your Italian line. And finally, these vital record documents, they need to be translated into Italian, and the translations need to be certified either through an Italian court or through an Italian consulate.
Very interesting. And once you've collected all of your documents, you've gone through all of these processes so far, these steps rather, to be able to figure out how you can actually go about this. I think there's some very important factors to consider moving forward, like where you want to be in Italy, or I guess really the next question should be, can you apply at any municipality in Italy?
A lot of people believe or are under the impression that you need to use the municipality of birth of your ancestor, and some municipalities will be under the wrong assumption that's what you have to do. But under the law, you can apply in any municipality, in any of the roughly 8,000 municipalities that we have in Italy. And like I said in other videos, if possible, if you're choosing, I would suggest to avoid big cities because the process might be slowed down. You might have to deal with different offices rather than one single office. So you might have to go to the residency office and then citizenship office. Whereas in smaller towns, everything is normally handled by one single office and even by one single person. Make sure, that's a general suggestion, that the town that you're going to be working with knows how the process works. Sometimes clerks in Italy are unprepared and unable to assist with this process just because they do not know how this works. So choose wisely the municipality that you want to work with.
And so once you've gone through that decision-making process and figured out which one may be the most appropriate for you, and I would assume maybe even contacting them, like you've mentioned, but previously, beforehand, would probably be a great idea to do. But how do you actually go and establish residency? Because that is a very necessary part of this process as well.
Americans can enter Italy without the need to apply for a visa. So you travel to Italy as a tourist, and the first step of the process is to establish residency in an Italian town. you do so by visiting the town hall, the residency office. Within the town hall, you need to have a lease agreement, or if you own a property, you need to show your property deed, but you do need to have a property where you want to establish residency, and the process involves signing some forms. In the town hall, they will want to see your lease agreement if you have a rental, and that's the very first step of the dual citizenship process in Italy.
Again, very useful information to know. And I've got another doubled up question for you. You mentioned about the residency and how that kind of works, but the office where you go and do that, is that the same office where you'll go and actually make your application for Italian citizenship by descent? And also the other question on top of that is, if it isn't the same office, then which office would you need to go to make that application?
Technically speaking, and in most cases, there are two separate offices where you apply for residency and where you apply for citizenship, and you're going to be dealing with two different people. However, in the smaller municipality, it's possible that there is only one office that deals with residency, the Ufficio Residenza, that deals also with citizenship. That's normally the Ufficio di Stato Civile. It's also possible, though unlikely, that it will be only one person that deals with both those situations, residency and citizenship.
And so once you've gone through that and you've actually made the application, how long will it take for citizenship to be actually granted?
That highly varies depending on the municipality, but also depending on the response time of the consulates that are involved in your case. We have said this in other videos. When you apply for citizenship in Italy, yes, you're dealing with the municipality, with the clerk at the municipality, but the same clerk needs to ask questions to some consulates abroad, and specifically the consulates that have jurisdiction over the places of residency of the ascendants and ancestors in your Italian line, and over your former place of residency in the US. They need to check that none of you, so neither yourself nor the individuals in your Italian line, ever filed a formal act of renunciation to Italian citizenship, which is normally never the case, but nonetheless they have to check. And it's a formality of the process, so they need to wait for answers from these consulates. And the higher the number of consulates involved is, the longer the process might take. And the average duration of the process in Italy is probably roughly 6 months, but the process could be as short as just a few months, and it could be as long as 10 to 12 months.
And so while you're waiting for this process to finish up, and during that time, of course, there's some things to take into consideration about traveling or taking advantage of being able to travel around Italy. But will you also be able to travel around the European Union while you're waiting for this? Or does the regular 90-day Schengen visa apply?
Exactly, the 90 days Schengen visa will apply, meaning that yes, you're able to travel outside of Italy within the European Union, but the residency permit that is given to you while you're awaiting citizenship is only valid in Italy, meaning that if you go outside of Italy, the normal rules will apply.
Again, very interesting and very useful information. And one last question that I'm going to leave this off with is, what happens after you are granted citizenship? What happens? Do you immediately get a passport? Do you get a piece of paper? Do you get a phone call? Do you have to do anything after the fact? Or what happens there?
Since you're applying for a retroactive recognition of your birthright, the process is not very formal in the end. I mean, some people expect a citizenship certificate or something nice that they can hang on the wall. But the thing is, because you're applying for citizenship by descent, you're basically retroactively having the Italian government retroactively recognize that you have been a citizen since birth. So the process ends without a lot of formalities. A letter is sent, sometimes an email, where they say the local government says, hey, the clerk actually at the town hall says, hey, you have been granted Italian citizenship, or more precisely, you've been recognized as an Italian citizen since your birth. So now you can apply for an Italian passport. And if you want to continue residing in Italy, you can apply for an Italian passport through the local police office, the Questura. That's the office in Italy that releases passports. Or if you want to relocate abroad, back to the US or in another foreign country, you should register with the AIRE, the Registry of Italian Citizens Residing Abroad, which is a registry held by the consulate. And once you're registered, you can then apply for a passport through the consulate.
Well, Marco, thank you so much for making yourself available for this informative episode of the Italian Citizenship Podcast. But of course, if anybody is interested in seeking your assistance or the assistance of your team, how can they get in contact with you guys?
People can contact us through our website, italiancitizenshipassistance.com, or give us a call. The number is on our website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if anybody's interested in more content like this about getting their Italian citizenship or applying for Italian citizenship with their spouse or through residency, whatever it may be sure that you're subscribed to this YouTube channel as well as the audio only podcast. But of course, by subscribing to the YouTube channel, you are also automatically subscribed to the Italian Real Estate Podcast, another podcast where Marco and I collaborate on these topics and dive into some of the aspects of what it can take on the practical side for renting an apartment or buying an apartment or a property, whatever it may be, as well as some of the different places in Italy that you may want to take into consideration. And also, if you're interested in more content about life in Italy, living in Italy, or living in the European Union as a dual citizen expat living abroad, be sure to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, or you can search for Not Your Average Globetrotter for the audio only podcast. But again, Mr. Marco Permunian, thank you so much for making yourself available for this episode of the Italian Citizenship Podcast presented by Italiancitizenshipassistance.com. And I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.